I had built empires out of numbers, lines on paper that bent markets and moved ships across oceans, but it was a tremor in a teacup that made my hands shake for the first time in decades. The mug was bone china, painted with tiny swallows. It rattled against its saucer while I watched my wife, Sophia, glide across the winter light of our Sag Harbor conservatory, as if the frost on the glass had choreographed her steps. She was 47 years younger than me, a fact that strangers wore like a verdict on their faces. Elegant, brittle, curious. Sometimes I thought of us as rare elements pressed together in a lab experiment, two lives fused under heat and pressure to see whether we would spark or explode. I tell myself I am not cruel. I tell myself I am simply a man who prefers certainty to doubt. Doubt corrodes like salt water on iron. I tasted it the day I found the unsigned note tucked beneath the wainscoting panel in the library. If you want to know what loyalty looks like, stop pretending you already do. No signature, no handwriting I recognized. I laughed then, the sound clipped and sterile, but the laughter followed me down corridors and into dreams. I kept seeing the shape of my fortune reflected in the black glass of midnight windows, and in every reflection stood a young woman with eyes I loved and questions I feared. Sophia was raised on a coastline where the wind ate roofs for breakfast. She arrived in New York as an art student who photographed rust and called it memory. I funded her first gallery show because I wanted the memory to be ours. She loved my steadiness. I adored her velocity. But velocity can look like escape if you watch it for too long. And I had been watching. The way her phone screen dimmed when I walked in, the polite half-smile that closed like a curtain at the end of dinners, the late-night calls taken in the pantry, the soft click of the back door while the staff slept. Dr. Meacham told me not to entertain ideas that would raise my blood pressure. He advised water with lemon, a lovely lie in a crystal glass. He had known me long enough to recognize the stubborn angle of my jaw. "Arthur, let your heart be a house, not a bank vault," he said, an image that irritated me for days. I had made my living turning vaults into houses, wealth into shelter, shelter into legacy. Yet a tiny voice, the sort that lives behind the ribs and knocks at midnight, insisted that love needed windows, not walls. Still, the knocking grew louder when I imagined her standing at my bedside if I faltered. Would she hold my hand or check the clock? So I designed a test the way I'd once designed acquisitions, with contingencies, with exit ramps, with dispassion that felt like honor to a man who feared foolishness more than loneliness. I would pretend to be very sick, gravely ill, the kind that bends the spine of a household. I would tell only my attorney and the head housekeeper, both bound to me by years and by contracts that had kept wars from breaking out over lesser crises. We would stage the scans, rewrite the lab reports, acquire the right smell of antiseptic and the correct hush around my name. If loyalty was a muscle, I would see who flexed and who turned away. And yet, in the blue hour before dawn, I lay awake and weighed the sin of it. To counterfeit fragility is to counterfeit trust. But the note returned to me like a tide. If you want to know what loyalty looks like, I had spent a lifetime evaluating risks. The riskiest thing I could imagine was not knowing. I told myself that exposure heals, that light burns bacteria, that some truths arrive only after you pretend to be someone else. I told myself it would end quickly. The day I began the act, the house seemed to lean in. Footsteps softened. Clocks ticked more carefully. I let the color drain from my voice. I practiced breaths that sounded like broken waves. When Sophia came in, she smelled like cedar and cold air. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. She set down her camera bag and placed 2 fingers on my wrist, not to check my pulse, I think, but to confirm I was real. "What happened?" she asked. I had prepared a sentence that would carry me across a bridge I could not burn behind me. I spoke it slowly. "Something with the blood," I said. "Meacham thinks it's serious." Her lips parted as if to inhale every syllable before it hit the floor. She asked rapid questions. Then she stopped. She touched the porcelain cup by my bed and moved it half an inch. as if that tiny order would hold back chaos. "We will fight it," she said. It sounded like a line cut from a film we hadn't watched yet. I searched her face for the grit beneath the script. I wanted to see love's marrow. My heart pounded like a betrayer against my ribs. I'm not proud that I watched her more closely than I watched my own breath. I'm not proud that I noted the tilt of her phone, the timing of her texts, the names she did not say. But pride had left the building with certainty. For the first time in a life of almosts and approximations, I wanted something absolute. Her next decision would tell me whether I had built a cathedral or a theatre. I did not know that the play would extend beyond the stage I had prepared, or that the audience was larger than I imagined. I did not know that a test would summon its own examiner. I did not know, and the not knowing began to burn. But the worst was yet to come. I grew up in a row house where privacy was a rumor and secrets were currency. My father fixed clocks. He said time is a polite thief. It warns you as it steals. I learned to listen for the warning. I also learned that people make promises they intend to keep until the weather changes. Wealth lets you build weatherproof rooms. Love hands you a match and asks you to trust the wood. I am telling you this because I want you to understand why I did what I did, why an old man with a shipyard of blessings would stage his own illness, like a play no one asked to see. I wanted a measurement that didn't blur with mood or mercy. I wanted to find out if my house was built on sand while I could still walk the perimeter. Sophia met me at a benefit for sea turtles, of all creatures. She laughed at my tie, dark green with lighter green shells, then told me she had run away from a storm and was still learning how to stand on dry land. I said I could teach her. She said I could try. I married her under a rain of white petals that got stuck in my hair, turning me briefly into a dapper snowdrift. The tabloids made our age gap their carnival ride. I thought we could outlast the noise by outloving it. Sometimes we did. Sometimes we drowned it in silence and work. Other times, silence pooled like a lake in the middle of us, reflecting faces we didn't recognize. When I tell you I pretended to be ill, you might picture a melodrama. It wasn't. It was logistics. Meacham created imaging with enough artifacts to be plausible and bleak. My attorney, Peters, revised my living will to show rapid movements of assets in the event of incapacity. The housekeeper, Marta, reduced the menu to pale foods that looked like surrender. We changed the lighting. We kept the mirrors polished, because they make liars nervous. I lay in bed and tried to translate love into data points without losing the language entirely. In the first 48 hours, Sophia did not leave my side. She cancelled a trip to Marfa. She called her sister. She made a list on a yellow legal pad. Specialists, second opinions, clinics in Switzerland, with names that sound like wind chimes. She slept on the chaise under the window and woke every hour to listen to my breath as if words might hide inside it. She was fierce and tender and occasionally far away, eyes narrowed at a horizon I couldn't see. I told myself that vigilance can look like distance. I told myself that we are all guilty of drifting in storms. On the third day, a man named Elias called. I only know his name because she whispered it when she thought I was asleep. I heard the way her mouth softened around it. Vowels turned careful, consonants carried like breakables. "Not now," she said. "He's not well. No, I can't. Yes, I will. I don't know when." She hung up and stared at the ceiling until a tear slid into her hairline, like a secret returning home. I felt a new kind of pain, not in my chest or bones, but in the place where future tense used to live. Still, I told myself that friendship wears many coats. I told myself I was collecting evidence, not manufacturing fear. If you're still with me, if you want to know how a heart keeps its shape when the room starts to tilt, stay. I am not asking for pity. I am asking for witness. I have spent a lifetime behind glass, waving at the world through layers of reflection. I want to speak without a pain between us. If stories are bridges, come onto mine. Subscribe to this fragile truth, the way you subscribe to the next chapter of a show that tempts you with smoke and mirrors. Press the button that tells me you're here, that you want the next hour, the next breath, the next reveal, because the reveals did come. They came in clusters like constellations you only see when the power goes out. There were new names. A gallery owner in Tribeca who spoke in riddles, a charitable foundation that did not exist last month, a safe deposit box Sophia opened alone on a Wednesday morning. There were passwords I recognized and two I did not. There were photographs of a sculpture that looked like a heart, repaired with gold veins, the kind of repair that makes the break the most beautiful part. She held the photograph the way a person holds a rope. I confronted nothing. I staged everything. Meekum arrived with a somber face and a folder thick as winter. He murmured about progression. Marta, who believes in saints and quiet rebellion, began lighting a candle in the kitchen before dawn. Peters called in a specialist whose handshake felt like a signature on bad news. I let the performance deepen. I watched Sophia watching me. Some nights she cried into my pillow as if salt could sanctify a lie I hadn't yet named. Other nights she stood at the window for an hour and didn't blink. I began to understand that the test I'd invented was not measuring what I thought it was. It was measuring the pressure a secret puts on a pair of lungs. If you have ever stood at the edge of a decision and felt the floor hum beneath you, you know this part. The hum grew into a sound I recognized from my father's shop, the winding down of a clock that had not been tended in time. I could feel mechanisms loosening. I wanted to seize the key and twist. I wanted to speak the truth and smash the set. But momentum is a god we worship in America, and I had built a very elegant altar. Keep listening. Keep your finger on the next chapter button. The curtain was about to lift on a scene I had not planned, but the worst was yet to come. The first rupture came disguised as kindness. Sophia suggested we move to the small bedroom on the second floor, where morning light breaks gently, as if the sun is apologizing. "You'll sleep better there," she said. I agreed, because the bed in that room is narrow and honest, and I wanted honesty more than silk. That night I woke to the soft click of a message. I saw her silhouette in the hallway light, her head bowed, the glow on her face turning her into a votive. "I can't leave him like this," she whispered. "No, not because of the will. Stop it. Because I made a promise. Because promises are not weather." I closed my eyes and pretended to sink. My pulse vaulted. I hated myself for cataloguing her words like shares, for calculating their value in a market driven by fear. In the morning, she brought me toast and a newspaper folded to a feature on an artist who mended broken bowls with lacquer and gold. "Kintsugi," she said, and then she smiled in a way that broke me. "Scars as maps." I looked at the photograph and saw a lesson I was too stubborn to learn. If I had confessed the ruse then, perhaps the next turn would have not cut so deep. But men like me are trained to ride the tiger until the tiger rides us. 3 days later, Peters requested a private meeting. He arrived with a portfolio and the cloying scent of a man who had been up all night with numbers. "Arthur," he said, "there have been inquiries about the trust. Discreet but persistent. Someone is testing your fences." He paused. "Not Sophia." He watched my eyes right then. A small kindness I did not deserve. "Do you want me to follow it?" I hesitated, then nodded. The feeling that I was both the hunter and the hunted tightened around my throat. That evening, Sophia asked for the keys to the storage barn by the north hedges. "I want to bring in some boxes," she said. "Old work, things that might help me remember who I was before I learned to be a wife." The sentence stabbed and then soothed, a paradox that tasted like truth. I gave her the keys. Hours later, I watched from the balcony as she lifted a crate with the help of a man in a peacoat. Not Elias. Taller, careful. They moved in silence, like conspirators or siblings or both. I pressed my palm to the cold glass. My reflection shook its head at me as if to say, "You wanted clarity. Here it is, and it will cost you." The cost arrived as a midnight call from Peters. "I have a name," he said. "The inquiries trace back to an entity called Shoreline Second. It's a holding company that doesn't hold. Shell inside Shell. But there's a partner listed on a single document filed years ago, Elias Callan." The hum in the floor became a tremor. "There's more," Peter said, then stopped. "Are you alone?" I laughed, the sound arid. "In every way," I said. He hesitated, then spoke carefully. "Shoreline Second was seeded with capital from a philanthropy you endowed. The transfer looks authorized. By you." I did not remember the authorization, which terrified me more than betrayal. I signed nothing. I forget little. I searched the corridors of my mind for the room that housed that signature and found only doors that wouldn't open. "Send me the documents," I said. He did. The signature was mine, precise as a winter star, the date aligned with the week of our wedding. I put the phone down and understood there was a story beneath the story, a foundation under the foundation. I had been testing Sophia while a ghost tested me. The next day, Sophia told me she needed to go into the city. "Just a few hours," she said, lashes lowered, voice gentle the way nurses soften an injection. "I'll be back by dinner." I studied her and tried to separate love from fear in the planes of her face. "Take the driver," I said. "Of course," she answered, but I watched from the upstairs window as she slipped into a ride-share 2 blocks away. Old men should not run, but I ran. I called a second car and followed, my illness sagging around me like a costume that didn't fit. She went to a gallery in Tribeca with cement floors and flowers that looked like small explosions. I waited outside across the street, the raw air washing me clean and cold. She emerged with the tall man in the pea-coat and a woman with hair the color of iron filings. They spoke urgently, hands drawing math in the air. I heard one word through the traffic: safe. The woman handed Sophia a thin envelope. The man placed his palm on Sophia's shoulder with the tenderness of clergy. My heart invented 1,000 explanations, and none of them granted me peace. I pushed through the door, and the bells clattered like a confession falling out of a pocket. The woman turned, eyes sharp and pitying. "Mr. Vale," she said, my name on a stranger's tongue. "We didn't expect you." Sophia took a step back, then forward, then stopped between them and me, as if she were choosing a language. "Arthur," she said, voice low, "you shouldn't be out." I should have said, "I am not sick." Instead I said, "You shouldn't be here." The room tensed like a muscle before the lift. The tall man inclined his head. "My name is Jonah," he said. "I am Sophia's brother." Brother. The word detonated and then rearranged the furniture. I had met no family at the wedding because there had been no family then, a grief she carried like a coat she never removed. I began, then realized what I thought no longer mattered. Sophia's hand shook as she opened the envelope. She pulled out photographs of a storage unit, crates labeled with dates, and a copy of a notarized letter. She passed the letter to me. "This is why," she said. The notarized letter was from a woman named Celeste Callan, who claimed to be my first wife's cousin. It alleged that a portion of my early capital had originated from deeds transferred under distress during a political purge overseas. "Your fortune has ghosts," Sophia whispered, "and they came to my door." My throat closed. I had known of rumors, dismissed them as envy's fog. Now the fog condensed into rain, and still, beneath the thunder, a quieter fear continued to beat. What of Elias, and Shoreline Second, and the signature that wore my name like a mask? I opened my mouth to question, to accuse, to confess, but the gallery lights flickered and my phone vibrated with a text from Peters. "Emergency. Your foundation account attempted a wire. 7 million. Beneficiary. Shoreline Second. Authentication via token at your residence." The room tipped. Sophia saw my face and reached toward me. I did not take her hand. The bells at the door jangled again, and a boy in a courier cap stepped inside, holding a small tin box punctured with air holes, as if a living thing was inside. He said a name that belonged to me, but did not sound like mine, and I understood the play had called intermission without my consent. But the worst was yet to come. We returned to the house in a convoy of separate silences. Sophia rode with Jonah. I rode alone with the driver, who kept glancing at me in the rearview mirror the way people look at cliffs. Snow had started to stipple the windshield, a static that matched the ache behind my eyes. When we reached the gates, a patrol car idled by the hedges. Marta met me at the door, apron twisted in her hands. "The study," she said. "They're waiting." They meant Peters and a detective named Hale, who smelled like peppermint and policy. On the console lay the tin box the courier had delivered, its lid sealed now with a strip of brown tape, as if someone had tried to talk it into staying shut. Detective Hale spoke first. There had been attempts on multiple accounts, small test wires, then the large one. Authentication tokens pinged from within my home network. No external breach, no footprints outside the snow line. Either I had done it, or someone with my keys and codes had. I glanced at Sophia's face, which was naked with worry in a way that should have comforted me and did not. Jonah stood half a step behind her, hands in fists he did not intend as threats. Peters placed the forged true documents on the desk, like cards at the end of a losing hand. "Open it," Hale said, nodding at the tin box. Peters sliced the tape. Inside lay a stack of old photographs tied with twine, a folded scarf that still held the scent of smoke, and a small brass key with teeth like a skyline. The top photograph showed me at 28, in a port city lit a color I couldn't name, shaking hands with a man whose face was later erased by history's rough eraser. The next photograph showed a house my first wife and I once rented when we still pretended we were invincible. Beneath those, another image. Sophia, years before I met her, hair longer, eyes harder, standing in front of a half-finished mural that looked like a heart on fire. And then, a final picture. Recent, my library. At night, the panel of wainscoting slightly ajar, the corner of a note slipping into view. The stranger who took it had known my angles. Hale explained. Celeste Callan had hired a private archivist to assemble a dossier about the provenance of certain early investments of mine. Not illegal, he said gently. Not clean either. The dossier was sent to Sophia first, because Celeste had learned about the age gap, and guessed, correctly, that I protected my pride more than my truth. Shoreline Second had been formed not to steal from me, but to shield any contested funds into a neutral trust pending an investigation. Elias Callan, Celeste's nephew, had contacted Sophia months ago, urging transparency. "He is not a lover," Sophia said quietly, looking straight at me. "He is a lawyer. He is a man trying to set a bone that healed wrong." "So who is moving the money now?" I asked, voice low and splintered. Silence. Then Marta. She stepped forward, eyes bright with a grief I had never bothered to learn. "Me," she said. "Under instruction." The room blurred. "Whose instruction?" My voice rose. "Yours, Mr. Vale." She held up a phone. My spare, the one I kept in the safe behind the portrait, the one with biometric access set to my thumb pressed in polar cold. The messages were there, timed to the week of our wedding, written in my cadence, salted with phrases I used when I wanted to be obeyed without question. They directed Marta to facilitate discreet transfers to a protective entity in the event my health ever failed. They provided codes. They spoke of loyalty and legacy. I staggered as if someone had moved the horizon. "I did not write those," I said. "Then who wears your voice?" Hale asked. Sophia reached into her bag and laid down another key, twin to the brass one. "Arthur," she whispered. "Jonah and I found the storage unit indicated in Celeste's letter. Your first wife kept a strong box of original ledgers. They're complicated. They show gifts disguised as loans, and loans that were demands dressed as kindness. We planned to show you everything, but we wanted a mediator present. We wanted to avoid this exact inferno." She gestured to the papers, the phone, my face. "When you got sick, I waited. I thought it was a sign to pause. Then I received the anonymous note." She swallowed. "I wrote it." The room inhaled. "I was trying to make you ask me. I was trying to tell you without betraying you." She touched the empty tin. The photos were to prove we weren't ghosts. The floor under me stopped humming and started cracking. A memory surfaced, bright and merciless. The week of our wedding, a prankster cousin of my first wife who could imitate anyone's voice for sport, the way he had called our accountant once and nearly shifted a fortune by making jokes in my register, the way I had laughed, then changed nothing. I thought of Meacham's manufactured scans and my own manufactured fragility, lies calling cousins. "Detective," I said, voice steadier now. "Who else has had physical access to the house in the last 2 months?" He pulled out a notebook. Vendors, staff, friends, a conservator from the gallery to assess humidity in the library. Sophia requested it. Jonah stepped forward. "That was me," he said. "I used a contractor's badge to avoid curiosity. We were hiding the truth in plain sight." The detective nodded, then pointed to the photograph of the library. "This angle," he said, "is from the East Terrace camera. The feed was routed through a secondary server labeled with a name I can't repeat until I verify it." Peters, who hates suspense, exhaled sharply. "Say it." Hale met my eyes. "Shoreline first." My laugh sounded like a bark. Of course there was a first. Of course the shell had an older shell. Of course I had named it, back when I believed I could outrun shadows by outnumbering them. Sophia pressed a palm to my chest as if to keep my sternum from flying apart. "Arthur," she said, "I don't want your money. I want your truth, and I will not run." I looked at this woman I had tested like a counterfeit bill and saw the gold seams in the cracks we had made. I thought of my father and his clocks, of polite thieves and loud ones, of promises and weather. I thought of the way I had staged my death to measure her life. I straightened. "I am not sick," I said to the room. "I staged it." The confession peeled paint from the walls. Hale's jaw tensed. Peters closed his eyes. Marta crossed herself. Jonah's fists unclenched. Sophia did not flinch. "I know," she said. 3 syllables that detonated my defenses. "You breathe differently when you tell the truth, and you were breathing like a man who had misplaced it." Hale cleared his throat. "We still need to know who issued the current orders." He looked at me. "Mr. Dale, do you have an old partner with access to your voice, your habits, your house?" One name drifted in like smoke. Barrett Dunn, my earliest lieutenant, a man with a talent for climate control in boardrooms and a habit of calling my caution art. We had parted ways over ethics shaped like exits. He had vanished into wealth that did not make headlines. "Barrett," I said, and the room tilted again. Hale made a call. Marta whispered a prayer. Snow thickened against the glass. The house waited. The waiting ended with a siren's distant moan, and a message returned to Hale's phone. A ping from an address registered to a cottage in Amagansett that I had once bought as a gift for a partner whose loyalty I believed indestructible. Cameras captured a figure entering with a passcode I had used on my first safe. Hale turned to me. "We're going now," he said. "You should stay. You are, after all, very ill." His smile was not unkind. I almost laughed, but the sound dissolved into a shake. I wanted to be useful. I wanted to be forgiven. I wanted to set the bone. "I'm coming," I said. Sophia stepped beside me. "So am I." Jonah nodded. "And me." Hale hesitated, then relented. We walked out into the storm, a strange procession. An old millionaire who had lied about his body, a young woman who had told the truth about ghosts, a brother with open hands, a detective who believed in paper, and the snow which covered everything that stood still long enough. But the worst was yet to come. The cottage squatted behind dunes that held the wind like fists. Hale entered first, gun holstered, voice full of commands that matched his boots. Barrett Dunn sat in a chair facing the door, as if he knew we would come and wanted to be framed by our surprise. He had aged into a man who wore regret like a cologne you spray when you don't have time for a shower. He smiled, thin. "Arthur," he said, "how's the heart?" I looked at Sophia and found my center. "Recovering," I answered. Hale read him his rights, and read me with a glance that asked, "What do you want to do with the rest of your life?" Barrett's story was short and sordid. He had kept a skeleton key to my behaviors, the way some men keep letters from old lovers. When he learned through whispers that Sophia and the Callans were stirring dust around the origin of my early capital, he decided to accelerate the process by triggering protective transfers that would mire us in legal mud. "I thought you'd thank me for making the first move," he said, "and I saw the boy we once were, racing to be first to the finish line, even when we didn't know the prize. He had recorded my voice for years, in meetings, in cars, in toasts, and fed it to a program that could construct orders with my cadence. He hired a courier to deliver the tin box to agitate me into motion. Loyalty is leverage," he said. "You taught me that." I shook my head. "Then I taught you wrong. The state will do what the state must." Hale took Barrett away. "Evidence will stack. Lawyers will descend like winter birds. That is not the part that matters here. What matters is that on the drive back, Sophia laid the brass key in my palm and told me about the night she first received Celeste's letter. She had sat in the pantry with a glass of water and the sound of the refrigeration unit humming like a low, patient choir. She thought about sending it to Peter's. She thought about burning it. In the end, she called Jonah. "I needed family that wasn't money," she said. She looked out at the dunes and then back at me. "I also needed to know if, when the storm came, you would run or stand." We stood. In the days that followed, we opened boxes I had not known I owned. We read ledgers and letters. We found the places where my ambition had stepped too close to someone else's pain, and we wrote checks not as bandages, but as acknowledgements. We set aside a portion of the fortune I had built for a fund that would address the wrong buried beneath one of its stones. We named it after my father, who believed the purpose of a key is not to lock more doors, but to open the right one. Sophia returned the storage barn keys to me with a smile that belonged to both of us. I called a press conference no one expected from a man who loves privacy the way others love applause. I told the story in careful pieces, not to plead, but to set a record straight that had curled at the edges. I did not mention the illness I staged. That sin belongs to a private ledger we are still balancing. But I spoke of provenance, which is a fancy word for where things come from and where they go when the wind comes. I spoke of accountability not as spectacle, but as maintenance. The market did not crash. The sky did not fall. A few men sent me texts that read like eulogies for the pal I used to be. I let them go. At night we moved back to the small room where mourning apologizes. Sophia sleeps with a legal pad by the bed. I keep a notebook of clocks I want to buy and repair. Sometimes we fight. Sometimes we laugh in the kitchen until Marta tells us to go bother our ghosts elsewhere. Meacham shook his head at me and made me promise to stop selling tickets to tragedies he did not script. Peters bought new pens, which is what he does when the world wobbles. Jonah returns to the gallery and sends us photos of bowls stitched with gold, and once a photograph of the sea that looked like mussel. I have learned that loyalty cannot be measured by calamity tests. It is measured by the way hands reach for each other in small rooms, when lies have been drained, and all that's left is the engine of breath. I have learned that some wealth is wind and some is anchor, and the trick is knowing which to use when the weather turns. I have learned that pretending to be sick to test love is still a kind of sickness, a fever of fear, and that the cure is the truth spoken before the room tilts. If you have walked with me this far, if your own house has hummed beneath your feet, if your own heart has cracked and been healed with gold seams you did not expect to admire, stay with us a little longer. There are more rooms to open. There is more light to let in. Subscribe to this story of repair, to the next chapter where we meet our younger selves in the hallway and tell them what we should have heard years ago. That love is not a test you can pass or fail, but a craft you learn in storms. Sophia and I stand on the terrace sometimes and watch snow fall onto the hedges like absolution. We hold the brass key between us, not because it opens anything now, but because it reminds us that locks are only half the story. The other half is what you choose to share when you don't have to. The worst, it turns out, was not the secret or the test or the man who wore my voice. The worst would have been silence winning. And that, I promise you, is a storm I will never stage again. But the worst was yet to come. And when it did, we were ready, and we remained.